No, we're recording now. I think I can pause it though. Recording, and I will share my screen. So I know that you guys are seeing a weird screen right now because it keeps on doing that to me and I don't know how to fix it. Let me try this. All right, good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Evaluating the Broader Workforce Challenge through your workplace lens with our presenter, Jacqueline Romer-Zensky. Jackie is an organizational leadership management and policy consultant. Her work is informed by 25 years of public sector experience in executive management and policymaker roles. She has specialized experiences which include goal-oriented change initiatives, organizational consolidations, and multi-system partnerships. She's done a lot of great work on this webinar. We're excited to hear from her today. I will say that you'll hear again and again throughout the webinar, there's no magic bullet to solving this workforce challenge that, everyone is experiencing throughout the country, but today we hope you'll get some good insight, maybe some reminders and some things that can help you in your own workplace. We ask that you welcome everyone again. Please introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're from. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar and it will be available sometime after today's training. I say sometime after because I'm not exactly sure when it will be, but it will be available. You'll also be receiving a slide deck after today's training. You won't be receiving the full PowerPoint, but you will be receiving an amended version with a lot of the information we'll be sharing today. This training is co-sponsored by the Great Lakes Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration Cooperative Agreements. The content and views in this training are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA and the Department of Health and Human Services. The MHTTC network believes that words matter and uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. For more information and information on upcoming events, please follow the Great Lakes Mental Health Technology Transfer Center on social media or visit the website, and we'll be putting them in the chat later. If you're having technical, so I say this with understanding that technical issues are very frustrating. We're not anticipating any of those technical issues today, but I will say that Sarah and myself are not the experts at overcoming these technical challenges. We've done a number of these webinars and kind of a common theme is issue with volume. We ask that you please make sure your volume's turned up. If you're still having issues, try leaving the webinar and coming back in. Great deal at the Hyundai Getaway sales event with new cars arriving daily. Now's the time to get in. I have a video playing queued up and it started. Plus 0 payments for 90 days on a Hyundai Santa Fe. Visit buyhyundai.com today. We'll just save that for later. But if you do need to reach someone for support, we ask that you contact Sarah Cook, who's the Director of Behavioral Health Initiatives here at OACBHA.
Why could you be getting a bigger raise in 2022? You've probably seen the headlines. The labor market tight with employers struggling to find and
there we go. So Continue Education today is sponsored by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for 2.75 hours. We ask that you complete 2 surveys today. One is the GRIPPR evaluation that helps us to continue having trainings like this. And the other is a Survey Monkey, which is an evaluation after the training. We ask that you to complete that to receive continuing education. We ask that you stay the whole time today so you can receive all 2.75 hours of today's training. So without further ado, we will pass this over to Jackie. Thank you.
Thanks, Elijah. Thanks, Elijah. I'm going to try to share screen. Does everyone see a slide that says agenda on the top? A little thumbs up from Sarah, maybe? No? Is Elijah's screen still sharing? I will.
Okay, let's see. Elijah's computer just froze. I will see, but
I will stop share and try again. How's that?
okay, sounds good.
Can you see it now?
No, we queued this up perfectly, everyone. It's Friday and technical difficulties do happen.
All right. Well, how about I stop share for a minute and Elijah can get off and I'll come back on in a minute. But here's screen is still on. So people in the chat room were saying they could see it. So let's try this again. All right.
Yep. I think we've got it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. I just want to sort of build on how we got started here with Elijah. Our goal today, in the time we have, is to level set our understanding of what some of these workplace challenges are that we are seeing and the trends that we're seeing and what that information might spark for us at our individual organizations. Talk a little bit about the intersection of your workplace culture and how engaging on that cultural issue might help you with workforce engagement, recruitment, and retention. And then talk a little bit at the end about how you might set a tone or pursue a few things that meets and matches with your organization's goals. I want to echo what Elijah said in the opening. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. I wish there was a chance to do it face to face so we could really go back and forth with each other a little more than the webinar format allows. But I do want to say up front again, I am not a human resource expert. I am an organizational development consultant. I work largely in the health and human service and early childhood fields with nonprofits and government agents and some for-profits. So I do feel like I've seen these trends and been with a lot of you holding hands for the last few years as we've tried to struggle through some of the challenges we're having with recruitment and retention and staffing and culture and morale. So I want to present to you information today that's provocative, that helps you think, that recognizes that we are all experienced adults in the field. And so there probably aren't a lot of ideas that you're going to go, wow, I've maybe never heard that before. But I hope there are some nuances and some things that make you think, well, that's a little different way to turn the diamond that might be helpful in what I'm trying to achieve at my organization and for my clients and with my staff. So that's my goal today, that you walk away with at least a couple of nuggets that have got you thinking about something you might want to try or something that validates that what you're doing is appropriate and that you just have to stick with it and give it some time. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to work today. If I can get this thing to go to the next slide. It's weird. There we go. We're going to try to be as interactive as we can given the format. So please feel free to use the chat room. If something that we're talking about on screen prompts you to think, oh, I've read a great article about that, or I know a great video, or I just know something everyone should know, please put that in the chat room. I know when I'm at webinars, I find that to be extremely helpful. We do have our raise hand function and our Q&A function, and Elijah and Sarah will be monitoring that as we go. And toward the end of today, we'll also have some dedicated time to go through questions. We will be doing some raised hand functions along the way where I'll ask people if anybody wants to jump in and raise your hand, and Elijah will try to queue you up so you can hop in. We're also going to try to do some smartphone polling. I think we've already discovered with technology today, who knows? Most of the time it works, sometimes it doesn't. So if it doesn't, we're not going to worry about it, but we are going to try to use that as well. My fellow hosts will interject at any point today if they're seeing comments or something that it makes sense to address. And as we said, we will post the deck afterwards. I know there'll probably be a lot of data slides and you might want to take a peek at those later. So we'll make sure you have them. And somewhere in the middle where it seems like a good stopping point, we will take a 15-minute break. So Elijah, I don't know if you want to queue up our first poll question and queue up how people, what numbers they're texting to. Do you need me to stop sharing?
I'm going to double check to see if he's having
frozen
issues.
Okay. And if he is, it's not that big a deal. We can keep going. All right, let's just keep going, and we can always queue up our polling later when the time is right. So we're going to start off today talking about challenges and trends. And I think in order, oh wait, now I see the poll is on. I apologize, this isn't as smooth as we had hoped. Elijah, is there anything you want to be saying about this? If you want to turn your audio on.
He is still experiencing technical difficulties.
All right, I think I got it off the screen. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is tee up the workforce conversation within the broader what we've all been experiencing, because they kind of go hand in glove, and we've all been through a lot of challenges together since 2020 started. It's been sort of one thing after another. There's been calamities, there's been things we never anticipated. There's also been some discoveries and some things and strengths that we've all seized on that have been pretty amazing. And a lot of us are showing a lot of resiliency. So let's talk a little bit about what we have all collectively seen in the last couple of years. Let's go back to March of 2020. 2 years ago, this current odyssey or block of time really began. Global COVID-19 became a global pandemic. A lot of us quickly shifted to virtual offices. We had heroes who did come to work every day in all kinds of different fields to keep things going. There was a rush for protective equipment. Some of us had never talked about protective equipment as much in our lives as we have in those first 6 months. There were lockdowns, there was CARES money, there was PPP. Who knew we were going to have a toilet paper run? We all started watching Tiger King and Bridgerton. Then just when we were starting to get into some kind of strange new rhythm, the George Floyd tragedy struck, and social unrest, some rioting happened, and this deeper conversation about equity and racial bias, and really starting a lot of deeper soul searching for many people around those topics. The Abraham Accords happened. The Pentagon showed us actual videos of UFOs that they admitted were theirs. We had pandemic waves, election passion, lots of controversy. At the end of 20, the vaccine was approved, and many of us had, for the first time in our lives, a Zoom holiday. We headed into 2021, and it just continued to get stranger and stranger. We had a Capitol riot, we had a new president, we had political impasses, supply chain shortages, inflation started to emerge, illegal immigration surges, Afghanistan, Texas ice storm, Surfside collapse, Hurricane Ida. We had the Olympic Supper Games, and those of you on the call from Ohio got to experience cicadas. And then, who believes it? The Pentagon reports that there are UFOs. Derek Chauvin was convicted. Now we had ARPA and infrastructure. New variants became the terms, and pandemic fatigue began to set in. And our workforce shortages began to really intensify, and we began to experience the Great Resignation. And here we are in 2022. Are we post-pandemic? Are we now in an endemic? Are we cautiously optimistic? We just enjoyed the Olympic Winter Games. We had the great announcement that Intel is coming to Ohio. Now we're all watching the Ukraine situation. And our first African-American woman has been nominated to the US Supreme Court. And all of this collectively echoes through our families in a lot of ways. Approximately 5 million people have died worldwide due to this pandemic. The opioid, drug overdose, alcohol utilization, all of these things are a resurgence. And many of you are grappling with that on a daily basis in your work. Economic uncertainty is happening. At the height of the pandemic, there were 120,000 businesses that temporarily closed and more than 30 million US workers were unemployed. And now as the economy ramps back up, we are experiencing other challenges associated with the workforce. So that was a whirlwind recount. And there might've been a few things on there that you even forgot had happened in the last 2 years. But I'd like to go to the chat room, because I think as we talk about unprecedented workforce challenges, we also have to talk about the fact that we've seen a lot of things in our lifetime in the last 2 years we never thought we would see. So I'd love to see in the chat room, you chat up something big, something little that you never thought you would see that you've seen in the last 2 years.
So we have a number of responses coming in. The Black Lives Matter movement, mask everywhere.
Masks.
January 6th insurrection, no traffic. Thanks, Cheryl. I agree with that. January 6th, end of daylight savings, work from home for such a long time. Lee, I do agree with that. I just saw a post, my Facebook reminded me that I thought that the work from home would be like 3 weeks.
Hey, it was 15 days to slow the spread. That didn't work out so well either.
Yeah. Telehealth, the potential of another world war, virtual parties. Oh my goodness, yes. Virtual school, gas prices, all kids having to stay home from school. Lots of dog adoptions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. People passing away, empty shelves, hospitals being overwhelmed. I don't think I saw it, but my first thought was Betty White passing away.
Hey, Prince Harry quit the Royals.
Yeah.
My grandma's learned how to use Zoom. Heck, I tried to learn how to use Zoom, right? Baking bread. Yeah.
We're still trying.
So, a vaccine being developed that fast, drive-through vaccine clinics, right? Who would have thought of that? Tiger King, it won't end. Tiger King won't end, people. So it is, we've all seen things that, I didn't ever consider that I would walk into my local grocery store and see all these empty shelves. And what does that mean? And why is that happening? I don't know that I ever thought we would come together finally and coalesce around Juneteenth. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that have happened in the last couple of years that I think have taught us all to expect the unexpected, to be more nimble, to be more agile. But we're also trying to learn emotionally how to bounce back from these kinds of issues and some of the strife, that things that we would have maybe thought 2 years ago were no big deal, the way people have gone to their corners over some of it. So I wanted to share some of this to say, this is what we've all been through. And it's against this backdrop that we are talking about workforce. So let me share with you some polling, and some of you may have seen this. It's pretty new polling. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's the Stress in America 2022 poll, recognizing COVID's second anniversary. So life has changed forever. 63% of people say it has been forever changed by the pandemic. The last 2 years have been a blur for a lot of us. And we've also all worked at getting better at prioritizing what is important to us. I'm going to flip through some of these as just background slides. Again, I'll make sure that you all you all can have them later. More than 1 out of 2 of us have also reported that we've had some relationship strains or the end of relationships due to a lot of the conflicts that were spurred on by the pandemic. There's been events canceling, fights over masks, fights over vaccines, right? But the good news is that 40% of us said they have connected or formed relationships with people they would not have if it weren't for the COVID pandemic. I think people came together, people met neighbors, people understood the importance of their family. So not everything that's happened in the last 2 years has been bad. Some of it has helped illuminate our strength. One of the things that's weighing on all of us, and I have to say, as someone who works with people in the early childhood field a lot, the child development losses are really weighing on people. And I think this is something that we are going to see play out for a long time, And you can see here from these numbers that a lot of people are worried about it. We're also all starting to stress out about money and what's going on in the economy. And you can see back in February of 21, people are already worried about it, but you can see how those concerns are escalating for folks. So people are also worried about things that are the topics of the day, gas prices, inflation, and that most of the polling has popped significantly in the last few months. Supply chain issues remain a concern. The potential retaliation from Russia and the Russian invasion in Ukraine. How can we not all be concerned and worried about that? And we can see some more data about how that is really got people concerned. So how have we all coped? Well, we've gained weight. I, for one, can validate this. We've gained weight. So now we're all trying to lose weight. But an average of 26 pounds, that's pretty crazy. So, and there's a lot of people who've also been coping by drinking a lot more alcohol. So we've turned to some coping mechanisms that may not have been the healthiest. And overall, there's just been a rising level of anxiety. And I think it is important to note that some of this has been uneven. Not everyone has experienced all these different traumas and all these different stresses in the same way. So we've seen higher anxiety levels from people who have young children or school-age children and have had to figure out how to manage what their children are going through and the care of their children, and in some cases, the teaching of their children while they're grappling with everything else, including their jobs. Different people have had to deal with COVID in different ways, how it's impacted family members, whether you got one of the more milder strains or whether you got one of the strains that could have lasting health impacts. Some people lost their jobs or were furloughed. Other people were able to transition and go to home, and it didn't affect them in the same way, and they didn't experience the same level of health and safety issues. And for some people that had jobs where they had to travel a lot, and now they didn't have to travel a lot, that actually helped lower some of their stress. So the main point here is we've been through a lot, but we haven't all experienced it equally. But it has caused a lot of us to think very deeply about our choices in how we are organizing our workplace, and our choices about where we want to work and what we want out of work. It's making sense for you guys that this is the backdrop against which we are all in this game together. All right, I'm going to keep going. Again, feel free to put anything in the chat room that you like. So against this backdrop, we start to go into our main topic today. We are now experiencing the Great Resignation. Some people call it the Great Quit. Some people call it the Great Reshuffle. And perhaps a touch of something that people are starting to characterize as a phenomenon called lying flat. I will say, to prep for this, I looked at a ton of data, and I imagine some of it's data that you too have looked at. And I tried really hard to compare and contrast data around workforce that we had all seen in our roles prior to the pandemic and more recent data. And it was interesting when you did that some of the things that always were trendlining pre-2020 are not the same answers that people are giving now. So I tried to illuminate some of that distinction, and later I want to talk to you about whether we think that's an anomaly or if it really signals a paradigm shift. So the Great Resignation. Some of you experienced this on some level where you work. Last year, 47 million people quit their jobs. Employers have to replace 11 million more workers than they had to in 2020. This is a growing phenomenon, particularly for people under age 40, 41. And then you add to that natural attrition, and then you add to it higher retirements. We had 1.7 million more people retire last year than had been projected. So you have those under 40 making a lot of career and job choices, and you have those particularly over 65, but really it's 55 and older, making choices to retire sooner than they had potentially anticipated. And all of that leads to a real pressure system on staffing and employment. So overall, it means nationally, most employers are going to have to replace 35% of their workers this year. That's 1 out of 3 workers. So if you're not having to replace 1 out of 3 and you were upset about having to replace 1 out of 4 or 5, I hope you feel a tiny bit better. Doesn't necessarily fix your problem. But again, this is a national issue. It's more accentuated in certain industries and in certain parts of the country. But overall, this is a national and even an international phenomenon. And overall, I think what we've come to grapple with pre-20 and now 2022 is that we were having people chase jobs, and now we have jobs chasing people. I want to talk just briefly about lying flat. This is a phenomenon that has really started in Asia, particularly in China. And I think we could have an honest debate about whether any of this is trickling into the US or if it's in some more gentler form, if you will. But it began in China, where, again, many of these folks were experiencing 6 and 7 days a week of work, and really were pushed pretty hard, deciding it just wasn't worth it. And they flat out opted out of employment. They just quit their jobs, not to find another job, but they were just like, I'm not going to work anymore. And they called it that they were going to, quote, lie flat. So trying to figure out now, is some of that also trickling into the US as part of what we have talked about in the past as sort of the work-life balance? 2/3 of millennials who left their jobs last year left their jobs because they were citing mental health reasons, that they were stressed out. It was even a higher proportion for Gen Z. And some of those folks say they're not coming back, or they're not coming back in the short run. So again, I don't want to overstate this, but it is something we're seeing starting to happen worldwide, where flat out people are making the choice for whatever reason that they're not quitting to find another job. They're just opting out. I want to show you some stats again to level set what you're feeling in your own workplace or your own field versus what's happening across the American economy. So if you look at the line at the top, the gray line shows that if the pandemic hadn't hit and things had continued on the trend that they were on, where things would be. And the red line shows actual employment. So you can see at the height of the lockdowns, we had a pretty significant drop, but you can also see that since then, things have bounced back, and we're only 2.6% below where we should have been. That's still a lot. And again, with workers opting out and retiring, it makes those jobs that you do have, finding those candidates all the more difficult. Again, this is a national phenomenon. There's a lot of conversation about how this has impacted parents, and welcome any other data you guys have. There's a lot of data about this, but different data sources were fundamentally saying that it was a huge impact at the beginning. And you can see there was an uneven journey here. The blue line represents people who had children under age 6. The orange line represents the school-age children. What was interesting to me is that we keep hearing about the childcare shortage, which is real. And the childcare industry is in a major struggle right now also to find and pay for good workers. But the folks with the young children have been bouncing back actually better than the folks with the school-age children. I also love in the chat room, I want to point this out, when we're talking about laying flat, it's also people choosing to work for themselves or do something beyond traditional wages. Thank you, Martin, for making that point. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that. So certainly, if you have children of an age where you need to care for them or help teach them, it is impacting your ability to get back in the workforce, at least full time. But again, it's interesting because I would have thought the young children was the bigger issue, and at least in recent months, it's the school age. So we talked about this before, and I mostly put this chart up just because, no surprise, you can see that it absolutely mirrors each other. At the top, you have the record high quit rates. And at the bottom, you have the record high job openings fundamentally over the last 10 years. So you see the big dip in both when we were at the height of the pandemic and lockdowns, and you see now both are creeping up. People are quitting more, and we have more job openings. So there's no surprise, we would expect those lines to parallel each other, and they did. Quits by industry. Again, different industries, no surprise to any of you on the webinar today, have experienced the last 2 years differently. Obviously, those who are in the hospitality industry have really experienced it in a very difficult manner. We are fundamentally, most of us on the call are in that education and health services group, which, is kind of in the middle, maybe experienced it a little more dramatically than others. But basically in 2020, our quit rate was around 2%. And last year, at the end of last year, it was around 3%. So we also, though, no surprise to any of you, we're experiencing difficulties finding especially our skilled workers before any of this started, right? So we were already in many ways under stress before this happened. All right, I also want to cite this for you, and I suspect many of you have read this report. And if you haven't, I would really encourage you to download it and give it a read. And I also want to give a shout out not only to the Ohio Council for producing it, but for the 68 providers who were willing to share their data here in Ohio to help illuminate some points for us. So I'm going to hit this very briefly because, again, I suspect many of you have already read the report. This just sets the groundwork and talks about health professional shortage areas for mental health. Again, across the country, you can see that as you head to the Northeast, the shortages are not quite as intense, but you can see that there are shortages across the country. Here is Ohio. Again, the darker the score, the higher, or darker the color, excuse me, the higher the shortage. And if you read the small print on what they were measuring here when they called them health professionals, they used the term clinicians. So it's a fairly broad definition across many of the professional categories in mental health. But you can see we have a problem. And again, this was a 2021 production, I think, with data from earlier. So prior to some of the workforce stresses we have now. Here is the more county-specific map produced again in the Ohio Council's report, showing where where we have shortages. And again, pinks and reds mean shortages. So you can see that there's a significant challenge to the workforce issues here in Ohio. This data, again, this is cited in their report, but it's national data about Ohio. Talks more about some of the specific kinds of skilled positions that we're trying to fill. One of the main points that the report makes is, again, a lot of these shortage projections through 2030 were calculated pre-pandemic and also pre-economic challenges that we're experiencing today. So their take is that the projected shortages are actually probably worse. All right, again, some Ohio-specific data, changes in the behavioral health job turnover, and this was tracked from August to October of last year. And you can see here, when they're asking how has turnover changed over the last 3 months at your agency, both tracking clinical and medical staff, we have some people about the same, which is good. We don't have much decreasing. We have a lot of increasing turnover, again, tracking along with what we're seeing nationally. The next chart talks about difficulty in behavioral health staff recruitment and retention. And we would love to see more blue here. Blue means that keeping people and finding new people is either somewhat easy or very easy. And you can see that's not happening very much. We have a little better ease with keeping people and a really, really hard time finding new folks. Again, level setting with all of you. I doubt this is surprising news to any of you. Approximate time to fill a behavioral health job by clinical staff or medical staff categories. So basically, over 90% of the 68 providers who responded said it takes them 46 days or longer to find a clinical staff person, and 85% reported the medical positions, again, 46 days or longer. So I don't know, Elijah, if we can do a little polling. And again, I don't know if we have the text number to tell people what to text into to do the polling, but I was curious to ask people this question. So Elijah, let me ask you to open your microphone and tell us if we can do a poll or if we should just do a quick little chat room.
I think this would be good for a chat room.
All right. So I'm curious where you think your organization stands. Do you think you are going to need to replace more than 1 out of 3 of your people, around the 1 out of 3, less than that, or you just truly don't know?
We have a number of C's coming in and A's, a lot of C's and A's.
That's good. We like C's.
C's, A, C. Oh, here's a couple D's.
Yeah.
Yeah, no idea what we're restricting.
And that's okay. It's very difficult, some of this, to know because some of the choices people have made appear to be fairly spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
I like, again, it is different by different role. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
All right. So you're all thinking about this, but fundamentally, we are just affirming that this is going to be a bit of a challenge. So lots of data about where we're at and looking, both nationally and in Ohio about some of these trend lines and what we're facing. I want to spend a little time talking a little bit now about why. Why do we think this is happening? And are there any clues in the whys to help us think through what do we want to do next? So we have a very short video that I wanted to kick the conversation off with. So Elijah, do you need me to quit sharing?
Yeah, if you can stop sharing, I'll share my screen and this video is queued up. So I'll share sound.
Why could you be getting a bigger raise in 2022? You've probably seen the headlines, the labor market tight with employers struggling to find and keep workers. So many people quit their jobs during the pandemic, the trend even has its own name, the Great Resignation. Well, now it looks like businesses are prepared to pay up to keep the workers they have. A new survey of more than 1,000 U.S. companies found nearly 1 in 3 plan to bump up salary increase projections. Back in June, companies said they plan to boost salaries about 3% on average. Well, now that's increased to 3.4%. That is for employees at all levels, from executives to manual laborers. The biggest increases are expected in retail, energy, and industrial manufacturing. Experts say this shows companies are more concerned about the labor shortage than rising inflation. And there may be a good reason for that. A report from Credit Karma found 45% of Americans plan to look for a new job in 2022. The number one reason given by respondents? They weren't getting paid enough at their current job. But people aren't just hunting for a big salary. They say they're also looking for better benefits as well. With the Why, I'm Sherman Chow.
A lot has changed since COVID hit, you know, the reanalyzation of.
So I wanted to play that because, again, if you look at the data, and those of you who have been involved in managing your organizations for a long time, there has been a shift in why people say they're job hunting versus what they said a few years ago. And I think it bears some reflection on our part again about, is that a long-term shift? Is this a short-term shift? What are we dealing with, and how do we react to it? So I think all of you know that we are emerging from a traumatic time. It's been more traumatic for some people than others. Some people have been able to count on their resiliency more and find strength. And there's been a lot of support and good things that have happened too in the last couple of years. But when you're confronting the prospect of catching a disease that could kill you, people start to think about life a little differently. And I think that's just a given for most of us. And many people have experienced personal loss as well. So 36% of professionals say they plan to take a different job in the near future because the pandemic allowed them to reevaluate what they want and the change they needed. And again, beyond any of the trauma that might have produced that, even folks who didn't experience trauma, we went home, a lot of us. And other people weren't afforded that luxury, and they went out there as heroes and had to work in sometimes difficult and scary circumstances. And so people started to say, wait a minute, what do I want? I slowed down, and I kind of liked that. One of us lost our job and we managed to financially be okay. I needed to stay home with my kids, and we discovered we'd like one of us to keep doing that. There was all kinds of revelations that people have had, and that is showing up and impacting in the jobs they want and in what they want from their jobs. Fundamentally, the labor shortage has shifted powers to the workers. So they have more power right now than the employers. And many of you are all seeing that. Again, it can vary based on industry and role, but this is fundamentally true. Workers can negotiate more. The staff can ask for things they couldn't have asked for 2 years ago. And people are starting to say, well, why can't I? And what does it matter how I do my job as long as I do it? So I will, give an example. For many, many years, I worked in state government. And whenever the conversation came up about letting people work from home, it was always just a flat no. And people had solid reasons around worry about supervision, but also worries about the optics of public employees being paid with taxpayer dollars. If you're working from home, will people think you're working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we've all now, if you look at our state workforce, been doing it for a couple of years and doing it successfully. So now the conversation comes about coming back to work. And people say, but I was doing fine at home. Why do I have to come back? And so those conversations begin. And there are valid reasons around hybrid workforces and at in-place workforces. But these are the conversations that people are engaging in a way they did not engage 2 years ago because the facts have shifted. The facts have shifted. And for those folks 41 and under, when you look at the data, they are really promoting that they do not want to compromise their life balance. And so they want better wages and compensation packages. They want better control of their schedule, all to lead toward better work-life balance. Now, let me share a little bit more on why. And let me say this. I think the data shows us in many of the conversations that we've all had that this is not something that just popped in the last 9 months, that you could look back and see there were trends building prior to the pandemic in these directions. And so this may have just put a sharper point on it versus completely for some people being some new revelation. So why did people leave their jobs in 2021? The major reason was pay. Second was no opportunities for advancement. Third was feeling disrespected. Fourth was childcare. Fifth was the flexibility issues. Sixth was benefits. Then and then things continue on down. But if you look back at what people said in 2018, higher salary was down at 19, and the bigger issues were meeting a new challenge or culture. And if you look back historically, some of you will have heard for decades that people, the number one reason people quit their job is because they were quitting their boss. They were quitting their manager. They were quitting their supervisor. If you go back to 2015, there's a famous Gallup poll that 75% of people who quit say they quit because of their immediate boss. But now people are really saying, I want more money. I want more money. What benefit is most likely to be driving turnover? All of these are high. Every one of these reasons is 64% and over. But again, the first one is the lack of competitive pay, and then the lack of meaning and satisfying work. So this issue comes up. Look down below that. Then we have the health insurance, vacation, sick leave, 401k, right? So there's a financial theme in here that I think has probably always been there, but has now risen to the top, because as people talk about wanting that work-life balance, you start to see what matters to them. Okay. So, which of the following benefits are most important for your job satisfaction? We're trying to keep these people. What is most important to them? Competitive pay at 60%, health insurance, paid leave, vacation, remote work options. So the top four are things around money and flexibility. Then we get to meaning and satisfying work, but then we go back to this flexibility and money theme. Flexible schedule, paid sick leave, 401k matching, etc. So I want to talk about this a little bit more, because again, if we would have seen this chart earlier, a few years ago, I don't think this chart looked this way. Gallup tells us that pay and benefits has risen in priority from number 4 in 2015 to number 1 now. And work-life balance has moved from 53% citing it as important in 2015 to 61% now. And it is still important, though, because people are also saying they want to do what they do best. They want to use their strengths in a job. And if they can't find that job, they're willing to sort of create a job and do something different. So I don't put this up here to say how you work and the environment where you work and the purpose of your work doesn't matter. So I think it still does. And I think it still matters greatly. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think if we fix all those things, that at least in the short term, we will attract and retain workers. Because what workers at least under 40 are telling us is right now, what I need to do is take care of my family, and I need a higher wage. Job hunting plans among current employees. 42% say they are already looking. 19% say they are planning to look. So that's 61%. However, before, again, we can look at this data and go, oh my gosh. But look at 18. In 18, if you combine the people that were actively looking and passively open to it, again, you're similar. So they may not have been as active in 18, but people already were starting to move toward job hunting. And all of you guys know also the data shows you people switch jobs more now than they did historically. But again, more than half of the respondents who quit in 2021 and moved to a new position said their new position pays more and that they are enjoying a better work-life balance. So a theme is starting to emerge here. How could I entice you to stay?
Jackie,
How could I entice you to stay? Yes, hop in.
we have a comment that kind of relates to this last slide. Says we completed a salary survey in June 2021. We are highly competitive. However, when we are understaffed, you aren't meeting your budget and expenses are increasing. How do you explain to your staff that there may not be bonuses in the next year due to low revenue?
Right. And I do think that it's important. What I think the key is there is that you want to explain it to your staff. I think that you guys are in, I know not everyone on the call is in the exact same industry, but for those of us who are providers or Atom boards or in this field, you guys are in a difficult position because you're largely bound by commercial insurance rates, Medicaid rates, or some publicly funded funds from your ADAMS board. And there's only so much there. And you're in this rate-driven structure, which also pushes on productivity rates, right? So you have to hit certain productivity in order to churn enough money to pay what you've got or give them bonuses, right? So that's difficult enough. But then if people are saying, wait, I want more work-life balance, I want more flexibility in my schedule, then you have to go back and think through all your productivity targets and how your staffing patterns may have to change to do that. And so I think you guys are in a very difficult position. It's a very complex business model. And I don't know that you have an easy answer in front of you. And with inflation hitting, I'm not sure even if we can get the rates to go up, if we can get the rates to go up enough for you to make that dynamic switch. I don't mean to depress anyone on the call. I'm just trying to be very realistic. So I do think part of what you have to do is talk about the realities of it. So people don't think that somebody somewhere in the organization is making a ton of money and they're not, that they understand the finances. People grapple with things if they understand them. So it's tough to explain, but I think you can explain it. And I think that's important. And then I do think purpose matters. And we're going to circle back to that. I just didn't want people to think it was still all purpose, that there has been a dynamic. All right, I'm going to keep us going. What could your company offer you to entice you to stay? The number one thing at 74% was compensation. But people did have some other things that were important to them. Improving your culture and work environment, showing them that there's a career path and that they can keep learning. And then if there's some other benefits you can give them, again, I know the difficulty if you're running the business is extra benefits, whatever they are, cost money. So figuring out that financial model is part of the answer. But this is where I want to pivot a little bit to talking about, so 20 and 21 were sort of unplanned, although we did a lot of great reinvention. Where can you get more intentional with all of this data in 2022? So I do think you have to look at your compensation package. I don't think you can avoid it, and I don't think you are avoiding it. It is important. There's all kinds of different ways to go about this, and we're going to talk about that. I see someone in the chat room talked about autonomy. We're really going to talk about autonomy in a minute. Do you think that might be one of the keys that come in. So figuring out your compensation and recognize that just as you're figuring out things to balance out and keep people with retention, somebody else over here is figuring out how to entice a new employee. So trying to figure out how you can keep them and counterbalance what they might be able to get if they go, so that at least you can be comparable financially, or at least you can be in the ball game. And if you can at least be in the ball game, even if you can't exceed someone else, then you can start playing with other factors that can influence a person to say, I'm going to stay here. It's not worth a couple bucks more an hour to go somewhere else. These are all the different kind of benefits nationally that people have added. And I put this list up here just because there might be something on the list that you haven't thought of that might strike you that as something that you could pursue. One of the things that struck me on here was the fertility benefits. Again, if you think about the age of the group that is saying they want to move, many of them are in sort of those childbearing years. Childcare assistance is also on here. But I don't put this up as a magic bullet. I put this up as things you might want to think about. And again, we'll make sure you have this slide later. Here in Ohio, again, thanks to the Ohio Council and their membership for this report. They're doing a lot of things. That means many of you on the call are doing a lot of different things, from loan repayments, retention bonuses, signing bonuses, tuition assistance, other stuff. 43% of the responding providers say they're offering 3, 4, 5 or more of these kinds of benefits in combination to try to either recruit people or retain people. Again, I fully recognize how difficult it is to pull that off in the financial model that you are in. And I think it's very hard to come to any conclusion in today's job market beyond the fact that rates probably need to be higher. Significant obstacles that the folks here in Ohio are reporting. Again, things in red are the more significant. Red is most, yellow is more, the dark blue is significant. So in this report, there's quite a big conversation and recommendations around qualified applicants. Again, this is not a new conversation, at least in the state of Ohio. We don't have enough of the skilled workforce. I think we could argue that we haven't figured out the right incentives to get people into the field and to increase the pipeline coming out of our colleges and universities. But there's a lot of issues that you guys are reporting around licensure and certification, some of which folks feel could be improved. And if you're a skilled workforce person in Ohio in this field right now, you have a lot of options. We have an issue with overall lack of applicants. I do some work with the developmental disability field, and they're having a major struggle getting qualified applicants in, even for some of their positions that don't require advanced degrees. So attracting people to the field. But reinvention is the flip side of disruption, and this is where we have some ideas of what people are trying to do. Beyond pay, employees want flexibility. They really want it, and they're saying it in a variety of different ways. So if you can define flexibility within your positions and within your organization and offer people options, that's very, very attractive to people. And flexibility can play out in different ways between just thinking about hybrid work. It can play out in hours of work. It can also play out in giving people flexibility within their workday. So we'll talk some more about this as we keep exploring, but it's giving people ways to not always feel like they have to be full bore on. Can you work in some self-care days? Can you say there are certain parameters around when you expect emails or texts to be returned? You go home at night and I'm supposed to still be on responding to all of these things. Scheduling practices around shorter meetings and breaks go a long way to people start thinking about their workforce as flexible and more productive and less stressful. So again, lots of ways to think about flexibility, but it is something that to different degrees is polling as something people really want across all the age cohorts. But again, the Gen Z and millennials are really looking for this. And again, I think some of this, you'll look, this was 2019 and 2022. If you look at the data though, a lot of this was brewing and conversations about this was going on pre-pandemic. There's a ton of data. I didn't go into it deep here, but a lot of people, I think, intuitively thought folks wouldn't be as productive when they did things remotely or telehealth. And most of the data coming back is saying people were productive. Some of the data is actually coming back saying we were more productive. Workers say they want to stay home. Again, for some of your businesses and agencies where you work, that's an easier mix based on the positions and the roles than it is for others. So again, this is somewhat industry and role specific, but overall, 65% want to remain remote workers. 33% say they prefer a hybrid model. 2% say they want to return to the office. I've also seen other polling where it's more 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. What's interesting about some of that polling that I saw is neuroleadership, which is Neuroleadership Institute, might be someplace, and I'll put this in our deck so you can look it up. They're an HR firm. They have some very interesting data and research that they do. But they're saying what's so interesting about the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is that they ask people, why were you selecting remain remote, go hybrid, go all back in? Where would you actually be most productive? Not just where you want to, but where are you most productive? And then they did some follow-up studies, and they said that they've proven that based on the choice people made, 1 day a week more productive in their choice. So if I stay home, I'm 1 day a week more productive at home than I am in the office. If I'm a person who picked hybrid, I'm 1 day a week more productive. So if you can right size your role to where people want to be and then track their productivity, you actually might see productivity go up. Again, won't work for every role. I recognize that. I want to be Pollyanna. The scary thing is 58% say they might look for a new job instead of returning. 31% aren't sure. I think people aren't convinced yet how firm that data is, but there is a significant number of people saying, if you won't offer me the flex, I'll go somewhere where they will. Why do people prefer remote work? Some people, it's about the commute. Some people, it's about cost savings. There also are some reasons against remote work. Some people have a hard time unplugging. Some people have distractions at home. There's polling that says if you have those school age or young children, they're more likely to say, this isn't working out for me, trying to be home, at least right now. Tech problems. But ZipRecruiter reports when you post a position as a remote position, you get 300% more applicants. So I don't think this is a one size fits all. I think this is figuring out how to incorporate flexibility and hybrid models and thinking it through with your own staff. But it is a very, very appealing and attractive thing. If you can't offer money, can you tap into this flexibility piece for folks? So a little bit more about what people are saying working from home has done for them. 64% say it's made their easier on that work-life balance. 44 said it was easier, and 46 said it was about the same to get their work done. 72% did say they fear it's harder to advance in the job if you don't see me, right? And I think there's some very interesting supervisory components to that, and that would need to be explored. And then less connected to coworkers is another big fear. There is a social aspect to working, right? That can be very meaningful, and a connection aspect that can be very meaningful when you see people. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of companies go to a hybrid model, trying to accomplish the best of both. So, starting to wrap up this little bit of the flexibility conversation. 2-year study, 800,000 employees, a majority reported stable or increased productivity when working from home. 66.8% of HR executives say employees should be in the office at least 3 days a week for a company culture to survive. There's now some data saying that's probably not true, but that's what people think. And multiple surveys conclude at least 17% of workers, and possibly as many as 54%, would consider quitting if you're going to make me go back to the office. So I am curious, and we can just keep doing the chat room thing and not worry about trying to poll, unless, is it up?
Yep.
But can you tell people how to do it, just in case they're not sure?
So
Pop in.
the screen
Looks like most people do.
Yeah, we are getting results in now.
All right, you just go to your poll button.
Yeah, so it should be on your screen. Just select and submit. We're about 60% of participants, so we'll give it a couple more seconds. So I'm interested to see in the chat. I've seen some things, and maybe Jackie, you can talk a little bit about this at some point, but some people have said that this topic of returning back to the office has caused a lot of conflict and discussion.
Yeah, in fact, that was, you guys are like teeing me up. That was the very next question I was going to ask all of you. I think this has been a very difficult conversation, and it is very, on some level, functional or role specific. And sometimes it's hard to explain why it makes sense for one job and not for another job, right? And then you have to examine, well, if I gotten caught in old thinking, can I do something differently? But it can be very, very contentious. And I will tell you, a lot of my clients right now are in the throes of this conversation. So it can be a difficult choice. Some people are testing things and telling people up front, we're going to test something for this amount of time and see. But there are pros and cons to that. Once you test something, it's hard to pull back. So it sounds like we have a split between largely back in the office and utilizing a hybrid or flex model. Anybody who's using a hybrid or flex, I'd be curious in the chat room, or if somebody would want to raise their hand and Elijah can let you in, what that means. Because some people are doing it in terms of, we're in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you work from home Monday, Friday. Other people are, we're in the office 2 days, you work home 3 days. Other people, they're considering it a hybrid model. If some people work from home and some people don't. Some people are talking about different hours. So curious how you're defining a hybrid or flex model. If anybody wants to raise their hand, Elijah will let you in.
So we have Barbara, and I'm going to allow you to talk. So you'll just have to, looks like you'll have to unmute yourself, and then you can comment.
Most of my team's work is in meetings, so you have to be out, but I can allow them to have options to work from home. For example, to accommodate childcare or things like that. And then they're doing paperwork for documentation.
I'm sorry, what are they doing for documentation?
They're doing either we work in prevention, so our documentation is a little bit different, but we do document the services that we provide, but that's something that can be done remotely. And other kinds of planning, that sort of thing. If that's an issue, then I'd much rather keep them happy and out in the community and allow them the flexibility to deal with their family obligations.
How's it working for you guys?
So far, so good.
it's what they wanted, and you guys figured out a way to make it work, it sounds like.
I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate in the flexibility that I have through my funder and through my agency. So I think that's really important. You've mentioned how employees want flexibility, but I think the more we can be flexible and think outside the traditional box, then the easier it will be to keep them.
Yeah, it has to be a two-way street, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And thank you for hopping in. I think Elijah's going to let someone else in. Somebody in the chat room talked about supervision, and people go about it in different ways. Some people use software, some people do different kinds of check-ins and remotes, but I think I saw this fly by in the chat room, but I think this is an important point. It can be most difficult for a new employee. So it's sort of common sense, but there is actually some data behind this. If somebody is already sort of connected to the group, going home or even part-time going home, the connections are kind of there, and some of the supports are there, that if they don't understand something, it's easier to reach out to someone, etc. If you're relatively new to a team, then it can feel sort of isolating, and you will have to go out of your way to set up methodologies to help those people feel connected, whether you give them beyond a supervisor, maybe they have a buddy, but trying to figure out a way to connect in new people, which as you have more and more turnover and more people are kind of new, that's something you really have to think through, especially if you're all remote. There are easier ways to figure that out if you're hybrid. Elijah, do we have anybody else's hand up?
No, but we did have a number of comments saying that it seems like most people who are using that hybrid are 1 day a week in the office or 2 days a week in the office. Someone also said that new employees during probationary period have to be in the office every day of the week.
Yeah, getting them oriented and getting them going, right? I think that's something that we're all learning together, because we don't want to lose the connectedness and we don't want to lose a positive culture, but we also know this flexibility can be a key to a positive culture as well. So thank you guys. I think this is one of the conversations of our day right now, and trying to figure out this whole flexibility, whether it's around the hybrid office or other things in your office that you can make flexibility. That is very, very attractive to folks right now. So next question, and I'd love if somebody wants to raise their hand and talk about this a little bit, but somebody raised it already, and that is this issue of fairness and or resentment. Are you guys experiencing any tension between those whose role can let them be more flexible than other people's roles? And how are you guys dealing with this? Have you been able to turn it into a positive for people? Curious what you are seeing as this is playing out for you in real time. I don't know if you can take the poll off.
Yeah, the poll is off, should be off. Yeah, it's off.
There it goes. Sorry.
Nope, you're fine. Yeah, if anybody wants to raise their hand and comment, we'll give you the permission to talk. Someone said absolutely. Front office administrative staff who are not able to work from home were resentful of clinical staff that were able to work from home. It's been difficult ongoing conversation.
Mm. Yeah. Again, so much of it is role specific, right? Mm. Yep, that's a good point Deanna's making about can be just as challenging to work from home. I have had clients who have said people don't want to work from home, and then the rest of the organization's pushing it. And so, there's tension all around as you customize and think these things through, trying to come up with the right balance without losing good workers.
Yeah, someone else said that feel a lot of employees at my agency who provide direct services to clients feel there's more flexibility for administrative staff to work from home or able to have different accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
that probably goes back to the roles and,
Mhm.
you know, people needing to be in the office. Nita said, yes, tension. Staff left to work in the office feel as if they end up dealing with problems for staff that are at home and can't address them from their remote location. I've
Mhm.
heard that a number of times, especially in larger systems with mail rooms. The person on site has to, distribute all the mail. We have someone who, Freddie has raised his hand, so I'll allow him to talk.
Yeah, hop in.
You'll just need to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Freddie from Catholic Charities in Cleveland. So most of our programs have a remote work option. However, we are experiencing a little bit of resentment from our clinical staff in residential services, because obviously they're not able to work remotely. So it's been a challenge because, their work demands that they're there presently. So we're looking at ways of incentivizing those positions. But it's definitely a challenge. They see it as they haven't been able to have some of the advantages that people, the rest of the clinicians that are able to do remote work. So if anybody has any good ideas on how to incentivize residential clinical staff, let me know.
Yeah, really good point. Martin's making a good point about how do you keep adapting and how do you keep people up to date with the latest information and techniques. It can be harder. I will say most of my clients are either going back full or they're doing a hybrid. I don't think I have any clients who have stayed full remote. So that's interesting. I know friends of mine who work in the more corporate world have gone all remote. I can tell you my son's company, they did a poll of their workers and the workers said, we like going remote, and their functions allowed it. They went full on remote permanent. And my son at least has told me that it's helped them with recruitment. It's been one of their major recruitment is to tell people that. So I don't know if just our roles, again, I think it's function and field, but lots of people are going back or they're doing the hybrid where they're in the office 2 days a week to try to keep the corporate culture, the learning, some of the mentoring, some of the role modeling, some of that connectivity. And then sometimes that's the best way to have some of the group meetings and things like that are focused on those days and other assignments and action items and other kinds of work focused on the other days. All right. So we're all seeing this. We're all in the middle of this, which is what I think we would expect. I want to show you a couple of trends and then bring up a word somebody already put in the chat room that I think is the key. So top trends to think about. Technology is favoring the gig economy. So when someone said earlier that lying flat, sometimes it means opting out. And sometimes it means, no, I just really want to control. I'm going to be my own business. I'm going to become a contractor. There's a lot of that going on. So more and more people are using contract models versus FTE models. And people think that's only going to grow. There are pros and cons, as you all know, between being a contractor-based employer versus an FTE employer. And the same holds true as an employee. There are pros and cons, but that is what's growing. Talented people are becoming gig workers or contract workers. Collaboration is a big trend. So when you do have, if you go hybrid, those days when you're together, trying to figure out ways to make that also creative and social and not just we're just in the office. Again, making that vibrancy happen is a trend. Attracting millennials to fill the skill gap. So we have to shift our mindset from you're lucky to work here to what drives them to work here. And of course, these are generalizations. I always hate it when people say everyone under 40 thinks this way. Well, we're not a monolith, right? But it is something to think about what they want. Diversity. Are we pursuing engagement to diversify our staff? Do we have those kinds of strategies? If we got stuck in a rut where we are not recruiting people who are different than the people we already have on many different kinds of levels. Automation is coming, more and more roles that even 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we never ever thought a person wouldn't have to do, they don't have to do. And we see that growing. Alumni labor, this might go a little bit to that gig economy, at least in the short run. We had a lot of people retire. Can you tap into them to be some sort of part-time gig worker for you to at least supplement things while you try to figure out what your ongoing model might be? And again, just figuring out what kind of organizations, what kind of balance, life balance things you can offer to people that make you attractive. So want to seed this and talk about this for a few minutes, and then we'll take a break. And I want to give a shout out, but I forget who did it. So whoever you are, feel good right now. Earlier, the word autonomy showed up in the chat room. This may be the key. If you haven't already started trying this, if people are saying they want balance and they want some level of control, and if you think about what we've all been through in the last few years, and whenever you go through an event that's somewhat life-changing, or where you've watched everything change around you, one of the things you want most is some predictability, right? You want some certainty. You want to be able to fix some things. And we also know after trauma, and you guys know this way better than I do, that we try to seek connection, meaning, and control. So how can we harness some of that learnings that we know into our workforce and give our workforce some level of control? So what a lot of researchers are showing us, what a lot of my clients are telling me, what we're all starting to witness, is if you can give an employee or a prospective employee a little more autonomy over the circumstances than they had before, or a little more autonomy over their choices than they had with their previous employee, that is super attractive to people. And that's what people want. And you can design this in all kinds of ways, in where they work, in when they work, in who they work with to some extent. Even if they're work on a team or they have certain team projects, and you can say, this is who I think has to be in your team, but you get to pick one more, like who they get to work with, what you work on the most. And again, there are certain things you might not be able to change generally, but you might be able to say 4 out of 5 days you're working on this. On the 5th day, what would excite you? What project that would be value added to our mission and or our bottom line would excite you? What they're working on, and then how your compensation is structured. General Mills sort of did this. You may have read this little anecdotal study they did. Beginning, somebody talked about we were baking a lot. So when everyone started baking, we don't think sometimes how this plays through. All the baking we started doing put General Mills into hyperdrive because of all the flour and different things that they produce. So they had their workers working overtime, trying to keep up with demand. So they decided they wanted to do something nice, and they were just going to say everyone gets an extra day off. And they started thinking about, well, let's let the employees choose what they want. So they offered them a menu. They could take that extra day off work. They could get a bonus. They could just get some extra money, or they could direct a charitable donation if that made them feel better. And what they were shocked by was folks just loved that they had the choice. All the choices cost General Mills roughly the same, but the fact that they had the choice, it really empowered their workers and created a very positive energy. So 59% took the day off, 40%, 39% took the bonus, and 2% directed the money to charity. But they stumbled on this whole value of autonomy. And I know some of you are doing this because I've talked to some of you about things that you're already doing. And I know people I work with in the early childhood space, people I work with in the developmental disability space, I know they're already doing some of this. So I just want to say, if you're not doing it, step back and think about what you could offer. You could put a menu out. You might have a series of menus based on the topics and let people design their own packages, whether they're virtual, remote, flex, on-site. What are their work hours? Do you really care if they want to work 7:30 to 4:30 or 8 to 5? Maybe you do, maybe you always used to, but you don't need to now. What about the days of the week? Again, you have to think of your own business models, but are there things you can do flexible? Even things like lunch hours, breaks, how you go about some of those things. And I know some of you are in unionized or collective bargaining staffing situations, so there may have to be other levels of negotiation. But again, these things matter. Paid time off packages, there's a lot of different ways to go about that. Can you offer them different kinds of paid time off packages? Let them pick a project, let them pick someone who's on their team, or again, even things like once a month, you get to pick anyone out of this staff that you would like to have a mentoring lunch with. You know, it doesn't have to always be an everyday thing, but a way to give people access to people that they want to learn from or admire or know. So who they get to work with, who they get to learn from. There's a lot of research around learning and training and investing and showing people career paths really do matter, but there are a million ways to go about that. Let them help pick. Compensation features, and I know that many of you are already doing this, but again, you can put parameters around it. I have X amount of money to spend on this. How do you want it spent on you? And here I just have a list of things of different ways people can pick. But again, this whole autonomy, on-site childcare or tuition assistance toward childcare or public schools could be part of compensation, or it could be something you just offer. The whole organizational social cause, this is very interesting because I think we could argue many of the people on this call, your mission, your purpose is so worthy already and so rewarding. So trying to figure out how this fits in. But again, the polling shows for folks that are a little bit younger, this really, really resonates. You know, it all started with the Tom's thing. You buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes. Is there anything you're doing that can help rally your organization that everyone knows our group's also not only known for the great work we do anyway that's got purpose, but this is some cause we're rallying around or set of causes, or for every 6 months you work here, you get a bonus and I match your bonus to the charity of your choice. But that whole social giving is very, very attractive to a lot of people who are looking for life balance and looking for meaning, and you know, are maybe a little more altruistic than I'll say my generation was at their age, and trying to tap into it. I think the key is, and I hope this is where your mind is going now, your menu could look completely different than the person next to you on this webinar. But if you can start thinking in terms of menus, I did see something go by in the chat room, and I actually asked a client of mine this the other day, and I think they were talking to their accountant. They were offering people gift cards and things like that to try to get around, or that sounds inappropriate, to try to figure out the right way the taxing structure works. Like what are taxable benefits and what aren't? So they were trying to gain some clarity around that. So I do think you have to be thoughtful about if I'm now giving you so much mileage, is that a taxable benefit versus I gave you a bus pass? Is that just as taxable? So I do not pretend to be the person who understands all of that, but I would caution you to be sure you understood that if you're paying someone's gym membership, or if you're giving them big gift cards from Amazon or whoever, you do have to be thoughtful about whether that is still considered compensation that taxes have to be paid. So look at this. I love what Alicia just put in. Alicia Amato, are you willing to raise your hand and share? She did. Can you pop her in, Elijah?
Yeah, and she just needs to unmute herself.
Hello.
Hi, I love what you just wrote in the chat.
Yeah, it's that we try to do different things as an agency, but this year we've done some local 5Ks and encouraging staff to do that. We're also going to support our local Habitat for Humanity. We have 2 offices and they're doing like a flea market flip. So we're going to compete against each other to see who can raise the most for Habitat. And the winners are going to get extra personal time off. And then the other new thing, we've begun talking about possibly becoming Red Cross volunteers and having staff do potential deployment with them. And then they won't have to use their vacational personal time. It'll be paid time off if they do that kind of stuff. So just other things to get involved in the community and to support.
Do you get a sense, a sense from doing some of these things that people feel more allegiance to staying with your organization? I mean, they're good works and good things to do, even if people do move on, but do you have any sense of how that plays out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have, we did a 5K in February and I had 2 staff do that. And I've had others say, well, I really want to do it, but I want to wait till this. And so, it just kind of builds. And I know I've had staff with the flea market flip. I had a staff member say, I have somebody that I work with and it's always been hard to connect with them. And this is an area I think that we can really connect on because we both have very good ideas together. And I think that I'm really looking forward to this with them. So it's just different ways to build camaraderie within the agency and with staff. So I think that helps too.
Yeah. Thank you. When I saw some of your ideas fly by, I was like, oh, I want to hear more about this. So thank you for popping in. So
you're welcome.
And I just want to say, I think this idea of menu and autonomy could be our word, at least part of our solution. And again, it's also interesting. If you give people a menu, you can still control the finances of it, but let them control how it's paid. When I talk to people who are young and maybe don't have children, sometimes will say to me, well, they're spending all this money on the people who do have kids. Why can't I have something else? So figuring out ways to customize it. So an employee who has children might want something different than an employee who doesn't. An employee who lives in an urban setting might want something different than a rural setting. So letting people pick and sort of letting them own their own diversity about what they want, I think is something exciting to explore. Some other ideas to look at: if you are remote, you don't have to have people who live in Ohio or Michigan or Indiana. You can have a remote worker, who lives in Florida. So if you are all remote, think about your recruitment potentially differently. Other people are talking about it's hard to attract people. So if you have a cumbersome hiring process, you're going to lose them. So is your hiring process as streamlined as it can be? More and more people are now paying you to attend the interview or giving you a gift card to attend the interview. I'm sure many of you will share stories about being ghosted on the interviews. So you have to think out if financially, if that's a good move for you or not, but that's happening more and more. Looking to that older worker or somebody who you might think of that is traditionally underemployed. Can you up their hours? Again, can you think about diversity in a different way? Have you overlooked people with disabilities? Have you reached out? Are you accommodating them? Have you just thought about things differently so that more people are part of your applicant pool, if you will? I think a great tip is to acquire someone who you might think is a little underqualified and teach them. Again, for some of you, and depending on your jobs, I know you have to have certain certifications and licensure, and that doesn't work. But in other roles, sometimes taking a chance on someone and building in the teaching can require a little more effort upfront, but build loyalty along the way and help you get a talented person who's got the skills, and you just have to sort of help teach them the content. market your fulfilling purpose, even though money matters greatly to people. And I really think we have to know that in our bones. It does matter if people feel like they're making a difference. Strengthen your brand. Is your place a cool place to work? I was at someone's workplace yesterday and they had just repainted it into a color I wouldn't have chosen, but the staff chose it because they said that was the cool color. And, you know, they had added a little kitchenette because that's what the staff really wanted to make it cool. And they had put together this, I don't remember the exact word for it, but they basically made like this creative room where you could, you know, take your 15-minute break and do, you know, play games, sit in a beanbag, etc. So again, depends on who your workers is. This is a whole know your workers. What's cool to one person isn't cool to another. But ask the staff, what would make this place cooler? And make sure people have good technology. We're depending on it so much, and it's really frustrating when it doesn't work. So as we wrap up and get ready to go to break, I want to throw out one more idea that might just burst the bubble on everything I just showed you. But I'm really thinking about this, and I actually had a conversation with some of my colleagues this week prepping for this session. So we have all of this data. Again, I think a lot of this was churning pre-pandemic. We already were starting to see an uptake in people wanting more life balance, an uptake in people wanting more flex schedules and work from home, and already starting to really wonder why they weren't being paid more. So I don't think this all just magically happened in the last 6 months. But what I think is interesting is this flip from the reason I don't want to work here anymore is my boss to the reason I don't want to work here is money. Is this a long-term phenomenon, or is this a short-term shift based on current conditions? And will it last? Will inflationary pressures change decisions or make the money even more important? We have all seen people where you chase the money and it makes you really happy in the short run, but in the long run, you come back to, I'm not enjoying my job, or I don't really enjoy where I'm working, the atmosphere here. So in the long run, is this a short-term phenomenon? But once people settle in, we'll discover they really want what we always wanted, which was meaning and purpose and to feel valued and to learn. Will there be even more technology on the horizon that changes and shifts what we want and what we can afford? So I'm really struggling with, and I assume you guys are too on some level, how much of this data is an aberration and an economic international sort of phenomenon right now? When things settle in a year from now, will people still want the same things? And I will close before break with one last slide. And this is literally brand new data released this week. The search engine, the Muse, did a survey and found out that 7 out of 10 workers who changed jobs during the Great Resignation now regret it. Now, I will tell you this. I spent time last night. Anybody who's a better researcher than me, I'd love it if you can find it. I was trying to find the methodology behind this and the exact question behind this, because when I read deeper, I wasn't as convinced that the question was during the Great Resignation or during the last 6 months, and now you regret it, or was it more a longer term phenomenon when have you ever quit a job and regretted it? So I wasn't 100% clear on the methodology. I will say it is being reported as changed jobs during the Great Resignation, and 72% of them regret it. And they're calling it shift shock. So I don't know if any of you've heard this terminology, but it's that feeling when you start a new job and realize with either surprise or regret that the position or company is very different from what you were led to believe. And I will say I've experienced that in my life. So it's the shift shock of assuming that things are always better on the horizon. And there was some further data down in here about what percentage of them would be willing to go back to their old job if they could. So maybe there's a nugget in there. You had a good worker who left. You might want to reach back out to them 6 months later and say, hey, want to come back? and make them feel like you have an open door to come back, because there's some data out there saying they wish they could come back. So something to keep in mind. And I think we've all had that sick feeling when you made a choice and you were super excited. And then after you got there, you're like, oh no, oh no. So again, that all makes me wonder about choices people are making, and makes me wonder if in the end, the money matters, but also what matters is the experience people are having. And I also know that sometimes when you quit a job, you feel like that door was closed and I can't go back. And maybe there's a way for all of you to open the door to some of those people if you want them back, and let them back in. That might be a new pool of candidates to consider recruiting from. So I think this is a good stopping point to let everybody have a bit of a break. So Elijah, I think we had decided 10 or 15 minutes. What is the break time we should be giving people?
Well, we're a little over halfway, so let's do 10 minutes. We can come back at 10:51. Reminder, everyone, this is a break. Just like if you were in a normal training, you go out, do whatever, look at your phone, take a bathroom break, get something to drink, stretch, and then you come back. So encourage everyone to go take a break, stretch. If you have an Apple Watch, it'll probably tell you to get up and walk around a minute and shortly. So we'll be back at 10:51. All right.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. While we were out, I did go take a peek at that Shift Shock News poll. And I do tend to agree with Lori in the chat room that I think this is a longer period, but I just don't know. But it is interesting that they asked people how many would like to go back to their old job, which was where we left off. 48% said they would take their old job back if they could get it. So that's a lot of people to think about, again, when you think about your strategy. All right, so let's shift and talk a little bit about your organizational culture. I suspect that almost anyone on this call would be qualified to take my spot right now and talk about culture. We're going to kind of talk about what is culture, why it matters, why you might want to be tuning your culture constantly to keep the people you have. And then, quite frankly, satisfied employee is a wonderful recruiter. So how you make all of that happen is important. So I like to say that if you're in leadership mode and in a role of positional authority, you're helping establish the tone of the field of play. I'm an old sports person right now. I probably should put basketball up. Everyone's doing March Madness, but there are certain rules, there are certain parameters that you help set, certain values, certain expectations. You're modeling conduct. You're the person who's either spawning energy or sucking energy. There are certain things about how you set the tone for the field of play, and how you set the rules, and how you hold accountability, how you keep score, how you're supportive, how you teach a new player, how you coach up an old player, how you treat somebody who's injured, how you treat the star, how you treat the backbencher. All of those things are part of how you're helping establish the culture. Ultimately, every team player has to play the game. They have to do their job. It is a contract. There's an employment contract. I'm paying you to do a certain job, and my position needs to give you all the supports you need to do that job. But there is an important role around how you set up the field of play. Jim Tressel, former Ohio State coach, now at Youngstown State University, talks about how culture creates a team environment. It creates that team environment upon which we're all playing. So let's define culture. There are a lot of complicated ways to think about it, but fundamentally, it is a group of behaviors that the group and the individuals within that group will tolerate as normal and accepted. Whatever your group of people tolerate as normal and accepted. So it's things around your beliefs, your mindsets, your behaviors, But whatever you're willing to tolerate becomes your culture. Organizations have a series of subcultures, and you guys have all seen this. There can be an organizational culture, different units or offices might have a different vibe or culture than another unit or group. So there can be subcultures, but all together, these cultures form a foundation for where people work. And they can be very positive and they can be very negative. Sometimes when we go through this and we start giving examples, we all gravitate to giving the negative examples, but there can be very, very positive cultures as well. So it really is the shared everyday habits and what we collectively tolerate. That's what culture is. And you see it play out in a lot of different ways. Some organizations, I better call you director. Other places I can just call you Jane. Some cultures, everybody's late for meetings and nobody cares. Other cultures, you better be there on time. Some cultures, there's a lot of gossiping. Other cultures, that's not really tolerated. Some cultures, a lot of socializing. Some, no, we just do our work. We don't really socialize. Some have really good peer accountability and everyone holds each other accountable. Others, they look to the supervisors, and that's who the only people who do it. I've been in cultures where it's like typical to hate the boss, no matter who the boss is, and other cultures where we hate the frontline workers, no matter who the frontline workers are. We have cultures. I notice this a lot. Some cultures where there's a lot of cussing and foul language, and other cultures where you wouldn't dare do that. So all different kinds of cultures. Some cultures really are giving, and you watch them help each other out and go out of their way when someone is wounded to be the person who's there for them and supportive. And other cultures a little more impersonal. So what are your shared collective habits, and what will you all tolerate? That is the web you weave with your culture. That culture helps us as a group determine how we're going to deal with internal and external pressures, problems, opportunities. It gives us a framework for how we adjust and react to things. And new members are taught, this is how we do things here. This is how we deal with things, both positive and negative. And pretty soon you see the new people in this peer pressure structure adjusting to the norms of the culture. Here's how I think of it. I don't know if any of you guys have any have a dog or have an invisible fence. So think about culture like an invisible fence. Doesn't take you long to realize if I act this way, I'm accepted. If I do this, I get zapped. Like I need to stay here. This is what the group expects me to do. And if I try to do something a little different, they're in subtle and not so subtle ways. It is let known to me that that's not how we do things here. That's not how we do things here. And again, culture can be positive and negative.
We have someone who raised their hand. Do we want to get to that?
Sure.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to allow you to talk. You'll just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, if she pops back on, that's cool. Whenever she's ready, it's cool. I want to talk about the overlay between culture and morale. So morale, if you think about it, is the way we all think about the outlook of our employees, and that impacts our capacity to get things done. Do we all pull together? And when you think about positive morale, it's usually when everyone feels like we really pull together here. We really are like, we have a goal and we all recognize it and we can all work positively to make it happen. When we think about negative morale, it's people don't want to rally. everyone's backbiting, everyone doesn't care, a lot of apathy sometimes. My point to you is there's not a lot of distinction between morale and culture. The culture is what you will tolerate as normal and accepted, and morale is your collective outlook. So when I have clients and they tell me, well, we have a morale problem here, I say, no, you have a culture problem. You have a problem deeper than morale. Because in order to fix morale, you must fix culture. And you have to own that you have some cultural work to do. It means you're tolerating something as normal that you all shouldn't be tolerating as normal. And you need to begin to change that dynamic. A lot of us think of culture as something that doesn't apply when we are in a remote situation. But again, the folks at Neuro Leadership Institute have been doing some polling and some work on this, and they were working on this even pre-pandemic. And they're saying, no, your culture can stay just as strong when you're remote as when you're not, because you're still tolerating certain things as a group. You're still saying, yeah, this is how we behave. This is okay. This is not okay. We want to lift this up, etc. So their research is saying that workplace culture transcends the building. It really comes down to what you as a group tolerate as normal. Tolerate as normal. I think Karen's hand went back up again. I don't know if she wants to pop in. Karen, you need to unmute yourself if you want to pop in. Okay, maybe our technology is doing something weird. So I'd like to ask you guys all, just to get us a set of how deep to go into this. If you had to rate your organization's culture today, how would you rate it? Very positive, healthy morale, trends positive, you have real solid morale. It's pretty easily swayed, so it doesn't take too much to go positive or negative. Yeah, we're probably trending negative, or we're very negative and we have some serious morale problems.
So we have the poll up. We're about 35-40%. Looks like we're trends positive, solid
That's
morale.
good. Yeah, this is good.
Someone asked the organization or the department.
Well, I'm thinking organization, but again, you know, we're not doing something scientific here. So where you live and play is fine. But you're right. Again, departments can have different subunits in an organization. You have very different cultures. All right, but this is overall pretty good. And so I'm not that surprised either, given the line of work and what you all do, that you pay attention to this and you try to make sure that you're on the right side of tolerated behaviors. All right, I'm going to take the poll down, and I'm curious, either in the chat room, and again, if anybody wants to raise their hand, have you seen a cultural shift over the last 2 years? And I think some people have seen some real positives over the last 2 years, but have you seen within your organization a shift? And I do know the workforce problems have sometimes played out with stresses that aren't so positive. But I'm curious if you've seen a change. Is there any kind of change you would want to note and put in the chat room?
We have so far, but someone did ask, how do you distinguish one's own impressions and the overall morale?
That's a really good question. I mean, you can literally do a survey. I think, again, there are pros and cons to doing a survey. I think if you can have honest conversations with people about it, that's a pretty good understanding of what's positive and what's not. If people aren't even willing to engage in an honest conversation, that's a pretty good signal that things are worse than you think. But it does, adjusting a culture requires some difficult conversations sometimes.
Right. We have a number of people have said they've noticed a change in culture. Some have noticed a negative shift. Some feel that probably leadership thinks the morale is better than what it really is.
Yeah.
There's been an increased focus on compassion messaging, greater acceptance and recognition of the impact of trauma on the workforce. We have negative due to leadership changes.
Yeah. So I think that what you're saying resonates with me. I think these are things that folks are going through. I think there's been some positive things that have come to light and have helped people be more empathetic. I think we've seen a lot of organizations prove that they can be more agile and creative, and so not be so stuck in their norms. But some of the pressures that have been put on people, sometimes when you're under a lot of pressure and stress, you default to behaviors that might not be the ones you wish you were defaulting to. Let's explore this a little bit deeper. On the positive side, again, going back to the Harris poll, where they've literally been tracking all along, but they did the 2-year at the beginning, stress in America 2 years ago versus stress in America today. 54% of respondents believe mental health was prioritized at their company compared to other priorities, and that's up from 41% pre-pandemic. 47% believe that their company leaders were advocates for mental health at work, again, also up 10%. And 47% believe their managers were equipped to support them if they had mental health condition or a symptom, and that is up 8%. So that last one also reflects not only do people feel more empathetic and they're responding, but they literally are training people, and that shows a true investment in the mental health and support of their workers. I think those are all positive things we're seeing that improve culture, even though there's still a lot of ways to go. I'm going to flip through these next slides very quickly. We'll put them in the deck, so if you want to go back and look at them later, you can. There are some very common negative things that you can see. Oh my gosh, do we do this? When people think things aren't fair, morale tanks. People can't see what they do and how it fits the overall purpose. This next one is huge. When people see an unqualified individual in a position, it undercuts morale and undercuts in a huge way. Grappling with a new reality can be somewhat destabilizing, but it also can be positive. But being a good role model, how do you fix some of these things? Be a good role model, reconnect with your team, help people develop skills. There's a lot of data that talks about if people think you're teaching them, if people think they're going to learn here and they can be curious here, that's a huge positive in a culture. Adjusting your workspace. Is your workplace dirty? Is it dingy? Is it depressing? All of those things, they can be short-term lifts to fix them, but they do matter not only because of the environment, but it shows workers that you care about where they are and how they're moving. Improving your communications, setting measurable goals, etc. So we can go through those in more detail later. But what I want to talk about a little is just a couple of things that can be things to give you a heads up and be thinking about in your culture. Winston Churchill said, first we shape our structures and then our structures shape us. I think you do have to back up sometimes and think about what are we tolerating as normal that we really shouldn't be tolerating, and how much is that influencing us, and what are we encouraging as normal that we want to keep encouraging. So a lot of this goes back to how we're wired as human beings, and this is why culture is so important and becomes that invisible fence to us. Again, this is a pretty sophisticated audience today, so I'm not going to spend huge amounts of time on this. I think you pretty much know this, but as the signals come through our brain, they first travel through our limbic system, which is where our feelings are. This is where we process flight, fight, or freeze. And the impulses, the electrical signals in your body go through there before they get to our prefrontal cortex, which is where we do problem solving, thinking, learning, higher functioning, if you will. So we are hardwired as human beings for survival. And go back as far as you can think. Think about the gazelles. Elijah, I might have to ask you to play with me here. Think about when you've watched those Animal Kingdom shows on TV, and you've got the lion stalking the gazelles. What always happens to the one gazelle who straggles?
Oh, that's the first to go.
First to go. The lion gets them, right? So one of the things that we have had bred in us literally since the Stone Age is that there is safety in herds. That when you stick together and you're with the group, that's the safest place to be. That's hardwired into us. So people sometimes say, oh, I don't understand how somebody who's so positive is here 3 months and all of a sudden they're like a different person. You want to conform. You want to fit in with the group. You want to be accepted. So the group is tolerating things that you normally would say, I would never treat someone like that. But all of a sudden you're doing it too because you want to be part of a group. It's very insidious and it's sort of hardwired into us. And that's sort of why, in a nutshell, cultures are so powerful. And, you know, the old Peter Drucker saying that culture eats change for breakfast. It's why it's so important for you as a leader. And I think I want to use the term leader, not positional authority. I don't care what your job title is. If you're in your organization and you're willing to lead for better, paying attention to culture matters. And it matters every day. And it matters person by person by person. What is each person willing to tolerate and encourage? So if you don't call something out in the moment, you're endorsing it. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not a good thing. So a couple of things to look for, that if you're not sure about your culture and you don't know if you want to do a survey and all this, just listen for these two things. First thing I'm going to ask you to listen for is villain stories. So the concern about the villain story is what I think Stephen Colbert coined this phrase, truthiness. There's just enough nugget of truth in it that people start to believe it. So you see three people huddled in a room chatting about something. And then you also know somebody else has been slacking off. And then you see after the three people huddled that one of the three went and talked to that person. And the next thing you know, there's a story running around. That person is getting fired. And we know that I saw Kevin go talk to Stella and Kevin's behind it. We all know Kevin's behind it. And you know, the last time somebody got fired here, Kevin fired them. And you know that Kevin, he's nasty. And the next thing you know, there's a whole villain story running around with Kevin, where all Kevin did was talk to Stella about, you know, how something was going on one of her projects. But we take things we see and we turn somebody into a villain all the time. So it's beyond just gossiping, if you will, to there's always someone cast as a villain. And lots of organizations have lots of problems with this. If you're an organization where you think there's a lot of villain stories happening, somebody always is getting cast into the bad guy or bad woman role, it's something to be concerned about, because it's a symptom of something deeper going on, about fostering negativity, about seeing the worst in people, about connecting disparate pieces of information in a gossip and sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. There's all kind of behaviors there that you should be worried about your culture. Another quick hit, if you don't have time to do a deep diagnostic, is the clever stories. So the clever stories are sort of a takeoff on the villain story, but it's the opposite. No matter what happens, you see people inflating how they were the hero of the story. It can't just be that you as an organization wanted something to happen and the whole group really pulled together and something great happened. No, I have to make sure everyone knows that that happened because of me. And so I'm overly clever and I'm justifying some behavior. So even if I broke a rule to make it happen, that's why this happened. So if you are coming across a lot of what I would call villain stories or clever stories, that's a symptom that there's something wrong in your culture and you need to think about how to adjust it. You know, you guys are all pretty well trained in trauma. You could also think of another way of describing these things as, I've heard it literally described, especially the villain stories, as workplace violence, because they're sort of these up and down stories where you're vilifying someone and saying things that aren't true and ugly about them, or peer to peer, the same kind of thing, more horizontal. So this isn't oh well stuff. This is serious stuff. And if you have a preponderance of this kind of stuff, you really need to stop and think about it. And you have to start thinking about how are you going to change this? And there's really only one way to change that. And that is by stopping tolerating or upping your encouragement. And it has to be person by person. So it has to be, you know, a frank conversation with people about literally noticing that we're telling a lot of villain stories here. So I want all of you to know that I want no part of that. And from now on, if you catch me telling one, I want you to call me out on it. And if I catch you telling one, I'm going to call you out on it, because it's not how we all want to live, and it's not true, and it's not elevating the best in all of us. And it's as simple as the next time you come across somebody saying, well, you know, that Kevin, I saw him with Stella and he was doing boom, boom, boom. You just say, look, I don't want to be a part of that, and you shouldn't be talking about things you don't know. That's all you have to say. You don't have to get into a giant confrontation with someone. You just say, I don't want to be a part of what you're saying right now, and you should recognize you don't necessarily know what you're talking about. Enough people start saying stuff like that, and you start taking the power away from people who are doing it. And the same is true with encouraging. It's finding those things where somebody did something great, and you say, I'm blown away by the compassion you just showed that person. Or I thought it was great the way you pitched in and helped. And you start doing little moments of recognizing that kind of stuff. And the reason it works, and again, it seems tedious and people want some really flashy way to fix a culture. The reason it has to work person by person, and the reason it does work person by person, is because as much as those of you in the group who are CEOs think you're the most important person in your group, you're not. It's the person that the people that you work with turn their head to and look to for guidance. It's the person in the meeting where an idea was put forward and everyone subtly looks over at them to see if they're nodding yes or not. It's the person you turn to for guidance and support. That's the most important leader in the room. And it might be the CEO and it might be someone else. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with your job title. It has to do with who people respect and who they have affinity to. So when people that you respect and have affinity to start calling out these behaviors, either I'm not participating in the negative or I'm encouraging the positive, that's what starts the tip. That's what changes culture. And it happens in those micro moments. It happens right when you're witnessing it, right then. It doesn't happen like you collect them and then at the end of the week on Friday you say, let's talk about culture. That's a lecture. Changing culture is what happens in that micro moment when you call people out and say, I personally, me, don't know about you, but me, I don't think that's good normal behavior and I'm not participating. For me, I thought that was great normal behavior and I want to encourage it. So culture, it matters. It matters because it leads to purpose. It leads to your ability for morale, for you to be able to pull together and achieve, which leads to purpose, which is one of the main reasons people want to work for you. They want to feel like they were part of a bigger positive purpose. So understanding your culture, understanding what you're tolerating as normal. Is it good? Is it bad? The great news was most of you said it's pretty good in your organization. So how do you keep encouraging that and letting it build on itself and become even stronger? Letting it become even stronger. Does anybody want to hop in and say anything before we keep moving?
We have a question in the Q&A box. It says, how is it done without the person saying they won't tolerate it, without them now being the villain target for the group? How would you attempt this before moving to another organization? What if your supervisor leads the negative morale issue?
I think that, everyone has different risk tolerances, which is a little bit about what you're getting at. It is tricky when it's your boss, but I do think it doesn't have to be confrontational. And yes, for a moment in time, you might be seated as the bad guy, because when you do this, you are taking power away from whoever. Somebody's benefiting from telling the villain story, right? They're pumping themselves up by bringing other people down, right? So if you start calling people on it, they could feel threatened because that's part of their power base. But I go back to this tipping point. It's the bravery in the micro moments that will get you to a wholesale change. And there is no way around it. You have to have bravery on your own to say, I don't feel comfortable that we're having this conversation right now, and walk away. You don't have to get into a giant fight, but you do have to in some way let people know, no. And either other people will start to say, wow, I want to be brave like Jackie was and said that, or they don't. And if they don't and they won't, then maybe you don't want to work there. I do think there are subtle ways to, and not so subtle ways to talk to those above a supervisor. I can tell you, at least when I was in positions of authority, I wanted to know if that was happening, and would try to deal with it if it was happening, and had a bit of an open door policy. And I think most people do, but you have to, if you're a person in positional authority, make people feel comfortable that they can come to you. And are you making people feel comfortable? And remember back when I showed you very briefly the sources of negative morale? One of the biggest sources of negative morale is if you are empowering someone that is acting that way. If you have someone in a supervisory or leader or positional authority role that is role modeling inappropriately, then that's on you. Are you dealing with it? And you might be dealing with it behind the scenes and people don't quite know it yet, but are you dealing with it or are you looking away? That's your own micro moment. This is tough stuff. But if you don't tackle it, then, you get what you get, because then you're part of the problem. This is leadership stuff. This is really leadership stuff. Are you willing as an individual person to take a stand in these little micro moments and say, no, that's not who I am, and I don't want to be a part of this? Or that was phenomenal and I want to be like you. We could talk about culture for days. I think this topic is fascinating. And there are so many variations on it because it's all about people, and people can be messy. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of ideas because I know our time is waning down. Cultural ideas. Again, I think it's very positive how you guys reported in that things are already going for you. There's the poll back up. You could see this is good. Pay attention to your employees. Train your supervisors to notice changes. People are under a lot of stress. So whether you think of this as culture or investing in mental health, training people to ask questions. There's this old, and I honestly don't even know who to attribute it to because it's been around as long as I've been studying or learning or trying to be a better supervisor. there's sort of this list of questions they say you should be checking in on and asking your folks at least once a month. How are you? What's your biggest accomplishment this month? What's your biggest challenge right now? What things should we do differently? What resources would be helpful to you? Is there anything I can help you with? Just that check-in. It's almost like giving people another menu. We talked about giving them a compensation or a flexibility menu. This is like giving people the space to say, yes, I have to be accountable and get these things done. This is where I'm having trouble getting that stuff done. And it opens up a different kinds of dialogue versus a command and control dialogue. Introduce wellness activities or breaks. Again, I know a lot of you guys are doing this one. Another one is to take vacations. And I think with the short staff right now, this is a really hard one to honor. Did you know that in 2019, so this is before all vacations and everything started getting really disrupted, but Americans left 788 million vacation days that we didn't use. Most people don't use 9%. 1 out of their 10 vacation days, they're not using it. People need to refresh and reboot. And it's another way to encourage that work-life balance. Maybe you can't give people a lot of new days, but if you model and encourage that we really expect you to take the ones you have, that's another way to set a culture and honor that. Call out your villain and clever stories. Quit tolerating what you know you shouldn't tolerate. Prioritization is a huge cultural thing. When everything has to happen now and nothing can wait, it encourages a lot of bad behaviors. Talk about issues. Voids create misinformation. People are always prone to filling a story. It's sort of how our brains are wired. If we had more time to talk about communications, we are wired to tell stories. That's how we're wired. So if I only get 3 pieces of information from you, I will tell a story in my head. I will take those pieces of information and connect them. So earlier on, when someone asked about, boy, I'm not sure if people understand the productivity rates are tied to the rates we can bill. And I don't have the luxury of raising prices. And so this is how we end up in these financial parameters. Tell the story, because otherwise people are getting bits and pieces of it and they're telling the story. So tell people the story, the right story. Feedback loops, model effective meetings. Ineffective meetings really lead to poor morale. Establish when you'll respond to emails and texts. Figure out how to invest in learning. There's actually more and more data that online learning is more effective than in-person learning. Just flat out ask the staff what would make this a cool place to work. So we're going to post, when we post the deck, I will post this little worksheet. Again, not trying to claim it's a be all and end all, but it's a little worksheet where you can kind of go through and answer some questions and think about, is any of that happening here? And at the very end, there's a little accountability sheet where you can say, oh, after I've thought about it, these are the things I'm going to try to course correct and convince some other people to course correct. And again, sometimes that's encouraging more positive. I don't want this to slip into everything is bad. There are a lot of good features that we also want to keep. And one last point that I'm going to touch on lightly before we go to questions is the importance of feedback in your culture. And this is another sign of a healthy culture. In a healthy culture, you've established with your employees feedback loops. And as you guys know, you can have constructive feedback that addresses problems and positive feedback that offers praise. And then there's sort of another layer of feedback that's gratitude or appreciation, which might not be the same as praise, but it's also important to the environment. I'm not going to go deep into how to do it. I'm just going to put on your radar screen that offering feedback is important for your culture. It's important for that learning environment that employees say they want. And it's important toward achieving goals, which gets you to purpose, which is what people say they want. So once we get a good worker, we want to keep the good working. So I just want to point out this slide. For those of you who have a culture where you're not very good at giving feedback, and sometimes you might consider yourself to be a self-starter, so you don't feel like you need a lot of feedback, so you sort of project that onto other people when people do need a lot of feedback. So employees who receive predominantly negative manager feedback are 20 times more likely to be engaged than those who receive no feedback. An ignored employee is twice as likely to be actively disengaged compared to those whose managers focus only on their weakness. And managers who focus on employee strengths, those folks are 30 times more likely to see an actively engaged staff compared to managers who deny feedback. So at first brush, you might be thinking, I don't get that. You're telling me if I have an employee who's mostly getting negative feedback, they're still more engaged. So yes. And it's not that hard if you step back and think about it for a moment. What's the worst thing? It's to not be noticed. So if people are looking for purpose, and purpose is a main reason they're willing to stay with you, and they're going about their job and no one says anything to them, good or bad, you start to wonder, is my job important? A lot of times when you're messing up, you kind of in your gut know you're not doing it right. You might not know exactly what you're doing wrong, but you sort of sometimes have a feel like this isn't exactly flowing correctly. No one's paying any attention. Then you really start to think, well, I don't matter and my work doesn't matter. So even though we do not want to encourage pure negative or constructive feedback, no feedback at all is the worst. So Sarah just said this, some attention is better than no attention, right? And she, another Sarah said, it has to be timely and continuous. She's so exactly right. So those of you who are in positions where you are managers, teaching your managers or supervisors or working with your direct reports to have those routine things where you ask those 5 questions a manager should ask, right? And helping people when they need constructive feedback. You know, you can help a person course correct and problem solve without tearing them down. This is like teaching. I mean, the best constructive feedback is when you're in teacher mode. This didn't go quite right. Let's work together on how to fix it. Now you have a new tool. Hopefully you'll be better, right? Constructive feedback does not have to be a negative experience. It can be a teaching experience. And praise, we don't want fake praise. When you can really catch someone doing something really well and just literally say, hey, I noticed that you did this today. And my gosh, that was like, you're on top of your game. Very quickly, I want to show you this. There was some data around good days and bad days at work. And again, this all ties to workforce, because the more good days at work, the more purpose people have, the more likely they are to stay with you, right? So they defined a bad day as a day where you feel lousy on the job and you're unhappy at your work. And you kind of come home and say, I don't want that to happen to me again, right? So I will show you I did this with 2 of my clients. So these are clients to remain anonymous. And here's kind of what came out of that. And you can see that, how often do you have bad days at work? Client 1, thankfully, no one said every day, but they had 14%, more than 1 out of 10 of their employees saying at least 1 day a week, they go home feeling that way. More than 1 day a week, I'm sorry. And about 1 day a week, 43% said that. So think about their productivity by the time the end of that day happened, and think about were they charged up to come back in the next day, right? Client 2, they had 6% saying they felt that way almost every day. 6% of their workforce, right? So how do you fix this? You fix this by noticing, and this is why this is all within your control. it all ties back to purpose and the culture you're setting. And it's all these simple micro moment things. What happens on a good day? Something catalytic happened where somebody helped you. Somebody pitched in on something you were doing. It could be something minor, but at some point in the day, literally people report at one point during the day, somebody helped them. And at one point during the day, somebody offered them encouragement, whether it was an appreciation or a praise. And there is a distinction, thanking people and praising something in particular. That's all it took for them to go from a bad day, because bad stuff happened that day, but at least somebody noticed me and they cared. And right. What happens on a bad day? Exactly the opposite. They feel like somebody did something purposely that messed with them being able to achieve their job. And a lot of times that comes down to the boss saying everything's a priority. No, not everything is a priority. And somebody said something, told a villain story, did something discouraging that they felt undermined. So think how simple it could be to flip somebody from having a bad day to a good day. And think how you perform when you think you're having a good day. And think how you perform if you think someone's noticing you and teaching you when you're doing something wrong and praising you and appreciating you. Think about how that would shift things, and think about how that would make me feel I am in a purposeful job and people think I'm a contributor. So we could spend, again, a whole half day on the nuances of feedback and praise and appreciation. I just wanted to seed to you that these micro moments of what you will tolerate in a culture and instilling in your culture and work practices, feedback and praise are important components to complement what you might be able to do with a compensation package. So I'm going to stop and let Elijah throw it up, but not just the questions, but look, we're all grown-ups who are working in this field, who are smart. I am also open if somebody wants to share something and teach us on something or course correct something you think I said that I got wrong. Let's just throw it open for discussion. And then we'll come back and do a quick summary to wrap up.
Yeah, really great information. I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts about this stuff. So if you have some wheels turning in your head about maybe things you might try, maybe things you saw in the chat that resonated with you that said, oh yeah, we could do this at work, let us know. You can say it in the chat, or if you're brave and you want to model leadership amongst this group, raise your hand and we'll take you off mute, put you in the thing so you can share with the group. What are some of your thoughts, challenges?
And I see in the chat box, well, I'm sure someone's going to raise their hand, but as we're getting there, people are putting in great ideas about how they recognize folks. People like to get bonuses, no doubt about that. But generally speaking, when you read the research, the number one things people want is an oral moment of praise or appreciation in a timely manner. So it's lovely to write the notes. That's great. Anything that's like personalized at that. But sometimes I think, oh, people want to win awards or bonuses. And there's room in your sort of menu of ways that you do gratitude and praise for those things. But I don't want us to overlook the power of literally just noticing.
Yeah.
Vaccination mandate. There was some data, it's on one of the slides, that it was a factor in why people were quitting, but it wasn't as big a factor as we thought. So while Elijah gets you to raise your hands, I'll go back and see if I can find that stat for you.
Yeah, so like we said, lots of good information today. You're probably working on processing it. If you have any thoughts, want to come off the chat, tell us what you might be thinking about incorporating, or if you have any questions for clarification. Sarah, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I just wanted to direct everyone to the chat. I did drop a link to a book that I've used in the past. And I think it goes right along with Jackie's recommendation for an overall menu of benefits. There are some very helpful pages, I believe, towards the back of the book where you can print off, and it basically provides a menu to your employees of how they would like to be recognized. Not everyone wants to be recognized publicly. Not everyone wants a big scene. Some people would like a cookie, a pat on the back, or that handwritten note. So that, and it's a very, cheap book with very usable strategies that you can implement right away.
There's actually, I don't know which book you put in there, Sarah. There's actually a book. Some of you probably read the book, The Love Languages. There's actually a book about, I think it's called Your Love Language at Work or something. I don't know. Seems like an inappropriate title, but it talks about how different people want different kinds of appreciation and praise and how we all like it different. So someone did ask about the vaccine. So I think there's several issues to unpack there, and certain vaccine requirements because of the kind of role or responsibility you have if you're interacting with the public certainly may not be something you can control or handle. But when they ask people why they left jobs in 2021, only 8% said that requiring a COVID vaccine was why. So it was a factor, but it was not, and of course, 8% is a lot of people when you're fighting for every position, but I did want to at least share that with you.
Someone mentioned they've started using the languages of appreciation quiz for supervisors to learn what their staff prefer. Alicia said we use the leadership one and all staff take in. This way we can assign new tasks based on their strengths.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. And Elijah, this is me reflecting my own lack of technical know-how. Are we able to capture the chat so that we can get some of those good ideas to share with people later, or print out the chat or something?
Yeah, we can save the chat.
That'd be great. Thank you. All right. Anybody want in? Anybody have any questions? Anybody have any discussions? If not, we'll go ahead and sort of move into wrap-up mode.
We have a question here. It says lots of good information, lots of challenges within the workplace. Is there a priority list, best practice list of the order you recommend to your clients if the workplace has a lot of negativity? I think maybe a good question in a workplace with a lot of negativity is where's the one place to start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have to do a little bit of a diagnosis, if you will, first of all, and try to figure out, is it an overall cultural issue? Is it a couple of bad apple issues? And also wanting to understand some of your practices. So I probably start in 3 places. One, I probably have an honest conversation with either the whole staff or people who I think are influencers about what is culture and what kind of things are happening here. It actually can be a really interesting all staff conversation if you feel like you can set a safe field for doing that. And that's something you have to know where you're starting from. I think it's important to immediately train up whoever is in a supervisory role around feedback and praise immediately. And the third thing I would do that seems like it's easy, but you have to really train people, is I would immediately begin trying to have more effective meetings. Because when people feel like you're wasting their time, and an ineffective meeting also feels like no one's listening to you, which fosters the talk and the chat after the meeting. So teaching you how to have an effective meeting that is the right amount of time. And effective meetings can be different if they're Zoom meetings versus in-person meetings. So I would probably go to those 3 fronts, try to figure out who I need to seed the conversation on around stopping villain stories and clever stories and encouraging positive micro moment things. Managers understanding feedback and praise, and then modeling effective meetings. That's probably where I would start in a generic question like that without like knowing what's going on.
And I think that point about that effective meetings goes back to that communication and how when there's a void, it creates miscommunication. So not only do we have to have meetings and communicate, we have to do it effectively.
Right. Because if you're being ineffective too, you're never getting the goal. And so people are like, we're just wasting time. We're not really getting to the purpose. So it seems like it shouldn't be that hard to run an effective meeting, but an awful lot of people don't know how. So you might want to invest in a training about how to do effective meetings. All right, I'm going to keep us moving because I am watching the clock and I don't want to be the one who makes you all late for lunch. So let's start to wrap up. In the competitive marketplace, again, recognizing the marketplace is different by industry, different sometimes by geography, and different by roles. But is there a way to maximize your compensation package? Can you at least be competitive? Can you at least take that off the table for why people are either leaving or why they're not coming? Can you at least mitigate it so that other factors can come into play? Consider how to create autonomy. Consider menus. Wherever you can create a menu and let people choose, might complicate some of your management. It might complicate some of your paperwork, but I think that might go a long way and appeal to a lot of people who are thinking about where they want to work. Illuminate career paths for people so they see that you don't want to just hire them for a job. You want to invest in their future, and think about who you're reaching out to. Can you do gig workers? Are you reaching out to diverse fields? Do people who don't look like your current workforce feel comfortable applying? Do you make accommodations for people? Are you diverse? You might want to think about your retired. You might want to think about your previous employees who, at least some polling suggests, half of them wish they could come back. Do you amplify your purpose? Oh my gosh, you guys, this is a huge selling point. You guys have the purpose. You guys literally make a difference in people's lives. A lot of jobs cannot say that. So how do you amplify that and thank people for that and help them understand how fulfilling and important they are? Are you fostering positivity, positive cultures and feedback loops? And we've all learned how to be agile. So I'm just saying, apply that agility to this problem. Think about adjustments, think about your culture. Can you all commit to making some little change to either amplify what you guys have described as largely positive cultures, or to fix whatever might still be needing tweaked? And then I want to also encourage you to take care of yourself. It's not just the people you employ who are stressed right now, so are you. So take care of yourself and let other people see that you're taking care of yourself. I am taking that vacation day, because then you give them permission to take their vacation day. I am not going to return your text on the weekend. That gives them permission not to do it on the weekend. Now, again, I know some of you have residential, some of you have 24/7 operations. So you got to figure all that out, but please take care of yourself. And as Elijah said, let everyone else see it. Some final words of wisdom. Maya Angelou says, people will forget what you said. People may even forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. The culture we have is the culture we allow. We are a product of and the parent of our culture. A country is not just what it is, but what it tolerates. Invisible fences, that's what our culture is, but I know dogs who jump the invisible fence. I have seen it happen. So an invisible fence is not something that you can't penetrate. And just because it feels strong and it's not set the way you want it, don't think you can't go out and move it, because you can. You can be the brave dog who jumps it, and everyone will follow you. And then what's the final wisdom without quoting Disney somewhere? All you can do is the next right thing from Frozen. And then finally, this one. One thing I know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have found how to serve. Those who have found how to serve. And I think based on getting to look at who was going to be signed up to participate today, most of you are in careers of service. Turn other people onto it, man. You're making a difference. It's fulfilling. It's a struggle some days, but then when it comes together, you're like, wow, look what we just did. Look how we just helped people. Tap into that and feel proud of yourself. Feel proud of yourself. I know that you are all involved in a workforce struggle. It goes beyond the boundaries of your organization, quite frankly, beyond the boundaries of the state of Ohio and the United States of America. There's worldwide shifts going on right now, major economic shifts going on right now. None of us have figured out exactly how to fix it. Be proud of what you are thinking of, be creative and agile, and if you do the right thing and you promote purpose, in the end, I think we'll be okay. And together we'll all advocate for some of those other things that we know need to be changed. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with me this morning. As I said at the beginning, I don't pretend to be a human resource expert, but I've seen a few things, and I hope that I've at least given you something to think about, whether it's something that you're like, can give that a try, or, oh, I don't like that. I'm not doing that. I just hope it prompted some thinking on your part. Thanks for having me. And let me throw it back to Elijah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. You are getting a lot of thank yous, and this has been great and helpful. So we appreciate you taking the time this morning to be here. Again, we will make a slide deck available for people who've attended. It won't have all the slides, but some of the more salient points will be in that slide deck. Also, I put in the surveys a number of times in the chat, and I will continue to do that. We have a couple minutes before noon, so I encourage you, do the survey now. Don't wait. It won't take very long. We want you to get your CEU. So the first survey is the GIPRA evaluation, which allows us to continue. It helps us meet the requirements of our funders for trainings like this. So please complete that. And the second survey may be important for some of you counselors, social workers, SUD professionals, is the evaluation for CEUs. Remember, this webinar is worth 2.75 CEUs. We built in breaks already, so you'll get a certificate once you complete that SurveyMonkey survey. So again, the GIPRA one, really important because it allows us to meet the requirements of our grant. And then the SurveyMonkey survey is for CEUs. Both, we're asking you to complete both. If you don't need CEUs, you don't need to complete the SurveyMonkey one. You're more than welcome to, and we will send you a certificate regardless. But if you do need those CEUs, please make sure you're doing that one as well. Again, maybe 5 minutes max if you do both of them now. So we have a couple minutes. I'm going to stop the recording now.